only through weathering obstacles and grappling with difficulties and making mistakes that we truly learn who we are and as a consequence grow.
Hey, it's Ryan Holiday. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Stoic Podcast. My guest today is one of my favorite people in the whole world, Rich Roll, endurance athlete, vegan, best-selling author, amazing podcaster. I've had an amazing time, some of the longest, best conversations I've ever had in my life with Rich Roll over the years at his amazing house in California. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do that one at his place. We had to do it remotely, which you're seeing right now, or you're listening right now. But Rich has a new book out called Voicing Change, and it's sort of a best of greatest hits coffee table book built around the podcast. I contributed a special essay to it. A bunch of awesome people I know did as well. Anytime Rich does something, it's going to be thoughtful, it's going to be wise. It's going to give you a different perspective on things. And I think most of all, it's going to be really inspiring. A couple years ago, I was teasing Rich on Instagram. I worked out early and I said, take that, Rich Roll. He proceeded to, I think, swim 3,600 yards, 3 times further than I had swum, just to rub it in my face. Rich Roll is a machine. He was the first person to do an Ironman on consecutive days of every single one of the Hawaiian Islands. And he did it as a vegan, which is just incredible if you know anything about endurance athletes. He's really thoughtful. He's always compassionate. He always makes me think. His father, as it happens, is also an amazing writer. He wrote a brilliant book about George Marshall, which I've recommended on the reading list newsletter, so check that out as well. Rich Roll's first book, Finding Ultra, is a longtime favorite of mine as well. Took a bunch of notes on it. He's a great guy. So Rich and I talk about creating change, not so much in the political sense, but in oneself, in one's own life, as the Stoics say. Epictetus quotes Socrates. He says, some people delight in improving their farm. I delight in improving myself. And I think that's really where change comes from. And that's where I think Rich is coming from in this new book. So you can check out that new book at richroll.com. You can check out the podcast there or anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also check out this on YouTube. You can check out our interviews on YouTube as well. And I'm going to have another episode with Rich either before or after this. I'm not sure on the order. Rich was nice enough to interview me for LA Live Talks. And so that will be coming soon. We did an event for Lives of the Stoics, which was supposed to be in person, but again was remote. So that's awesome and coming up as well. And I can't wait for you to listen to this, my interview with Rich Roll, and coming soon, Rich Roll interviewing me. So how you holding up? How's it been?
Overall, I would say that I'm better than most. I get hit with waves of, mild despair from time to time. I don't like not being able to travel. I don't like not being able to plan adventures, the uncertainty of all of it, and then trying to parent 2 teenage daughters through all of this has definitely challenged my dad toolkit.
Yeah, and I feel like I have 2 sort of warning signs that friends may be going off the deep end. Number one is I hear they've started writing fiction. That's always something that
it's really getting bad if that's happening.
And then the other is are they growing a beard? And so I just thought I'd check in.
Yeah, I started growing this beard the day that the NBA canceled its season, and
in protest.
Well, basically, like, all right, well, I'm at home now. Here's a moment, so let's do this. I'm now entering Jack Dorsey, Rasputin territory, or territory. I don't know how much longer I can hang with this, but it's been kind of a fun little thing.
It actually hit me this morning that my youngest son, has now been half of his life has been spent in some sort of quarantine pandemic.
That's so crazy. What is his awareness around all of it?
I mean, obviously the good news, bad news there is like it's half his life, but that means he's only, 18 months old. But like he wasn't walking at the beginning and now he's walking. So it's so weird how long 8 months is, and then also how short it is, and how much can happen within 8 months.
And when you're young, your relationship with time is different.
Yes.
And weeks and months can feel like years. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I think all the time about how this is impacting her. I check in with her, constantly, but I can't help but wonder 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how this experience is going to impact an entire generation of young people and how they interface with the world.
Yeah, my wife was saying something. She was like, they can't tell us that they're having a hard time
Mm.
because they're 4 and 2. They don't actually know that they're having a hard time, even though they obviously are.
Yeah. Well, my teenage daughters have
They
figured
could
out.
tell you.
Yeah. They're not afraid to let me know how they're doing.
Although I was talking to a college basketball coach, and he was saying, like, he was like, how do I get them to understand whatever? We were going back and forth about it, and I was like, you got to understand, like, I think it had only been like 3-4 months of it at this point, but it was like, even this like 3 or 4 months was like 2% of their entire life. Like, if you're a college basketball player right now, to take like a 4 months off or whatever it had been at that time, that's to as you get older, you get more and more comfortable dealing with large amounts of time because you have large amounts of time. Like, it wasn't now that I have a 4-year-old, like, other than college, I really haven't done very many things that lasted 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's sort of, I think but as you get older, you have a better understanding of time. But the younger you are, the harder it is to wrap your head around how long this has gone on.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. I mean, I can't fathom the experience of the college athlete where their whole life is, in this funnel to this moment, and then it gets pulled out from underneath them, and there's just nothing you can do about it. Like, the sense of powerlessness and the lack of control over your own personal destiny is, unprecedented in our lifetimes. And I think the repercussions of this are going to be felt for decades to come. In what way, we're not sure right now, but certainly it's profound for so many people.
And don't you think the real, like, it's like we always underestimate the consequences of things in the long term. I feel like what we're going to really have trouble wrapping our heads around as we go forward is, like, how does a generation go through the world having been so utterly and completely failed from a moral and from a leadership standpoint, right? So, like, let's say you're a college athlete, and college athletics, as you know, are already morally complex, ethically fraught. It's a complicated, messed up world that you're lucky to get out of alive. And then how do you add to that, like, something like the Big Ten looking at the data, canceling, then seeing other people do it, and then getting pressure, and then deciding to reverse course. And then obviously look at all the kids who've gotten sick since that. It's like, how are those kids going to understand what leadership looks like going forward when they've seen such a lack of leadership in all facets of life in the last 8 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I think that we've never seen this level of distrust in our institutions and disappointment in the leadership. And what does that mean going forward with a whole generation of people that don't have the kind of relationship to democratic institutionalism that we do? And how does that then play out in terms of not only government, but corporate structure and just culture at large? I think it's massive. It would be interesting to look back into the historical record and track what the generation of young people who survived the 1918 pandemic ended up doing, and how that kind of informed how they lived their lives.
Although I was thinking about the history too, as I remember I listened to your episode with your dad, and he was talking about how it was the aftermath of Watergate that sent him to Washington and sort of shaped his understanding of the law. And so maybe the potential silver lining in all this is that from this colossal failure of leadership and moral leadership and just incompetence across the board, and I think you can say that apolitically, what will come out of it is a strong sense of like, hey, nobody's coming to save us.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be like a real, like I was looking at the super spreader event at the White House. And again, I think you can look at this non-politically. One of the things that bothered me the most about it was actually not just the lack of masks and the lack of precautions and the arrogance and all of that, but it was how old everyone was. Do you
Right.
know what I mean? It was just like, well, like it was dangerous. And then you add on top of this that most of these people should have retired a very long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe one of the upsides of all this is that a new generation of leaders steps forward into the breach.
Well, certainly, I've never seen this level of activism in young people. I was too young in the 60s to have any relationship with what that must have been like. But, I can just speak from personal experience having a 13-year-old daughter and how plugged in she is to the issues of the day. And I think we're seeing that, across the board. Social media has been a tool in that regard as much as it is, a distraction and, kind of a dumpster fire. But we are seeing a level of engagement with young people at levels I've never seen before in my life. And I do think that is a good thing. There's a sense of it's our time now. We're frustrated. This has been, screwed up to, an extent that is completely unfair. And, we're going to now step in and take the reins. And I think that's what history is. And I think that's a good thing and that we should welcome that.
So I was curious with the new book, when you're talking about change, are you thinking that kind of change, or are you thinking internal change, or is it both?
It's both, but I think all change begins with the self,
Yeah.
kind of hearkening to, traditions Eastern, that, the change you want to see in the world begins with your relationship with yourself. And I think when we start from that place and try to, perfect that so that we can become the best version of who we are and, the most fully expressed, authentic, grounded, capable individual, then we are able to see the world more clearly through, a more objective lens. And we become better, better partners, better neighbors, better servants, and better citizens.
I was curious, it's been a weird thing, like, because you and I both know so many people in the health and wellness space or the sort of self-improvement space. Has it been interesting for you to sort of watch either from afar your conversations with them, like sort of how they've dealt with the last 8 months? Because I've sort of seen people go in a couple different directions.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit. I find this to be utterly fascinating. The health and wellness space is something that I think germinated out of a more feminine sensibility, kind of taking care of yourself and your kids. And it's also born out of, an alternative perspective on healthcare, like a nod to, traditions ancient from Ayurveda to yoga,
Sure.
all of these, breathing practices that Wim Hof talks about. They all date back quite a long time. And the wellness space has been about kind of reconnecting with a lot of those traditions, which is interesting. And I think there's a lot to be gleaned, from how those work in our modern culture. But what we've seen over the last year has been really interesting because there's a fracture within the community, and a certain contingent of this community has gone full conspiracy mode. And I think that you could track that back. Like the antecedent of that, I think, is the anti-vax movement. Like this distrust of institutions
Sure.
is part and parcel of an aspect of the health and wellness space, has been kind of blown up and exacerbated, mushroom clouding into, all kinds of spurious theories about, everything from Dr. Fauci's relationship to Bill Gates to 5G to you name it. And to see a lot of, friends of mine and seemingly intelligent, grounded individuals embrace ideas that really aren't based in fact, because of this predisposition or this kind of distrust of institutions in general, has been, something I would have never predicted, but now seems to make sense, and I find utterly fascinating. To also say, to as a blanket statement, most of the health and wellness space tends to lean left, but some of these ideas that are now kind of percolating up are ideas that are more sort of endemic to the alt-right movement, and to see that health and wellness space move towards the alt-right and be embraced by the alt-right and be amplified by the alt-right is really kind of an interesting cultural experiment that's unfolding.
Hey everyone, I've talked about this before, but I don't drink coffee, I don't drink soda, so when I need like a jolt of energy, I've not always had the best options. But actually, right before I recorded this and right before I'm about to do the virtual talk I've got to do after this, I popped in a Neuromint, which are these great mints that give you energy and focus. I think concentration and energy are hard at any point, but even harder during months and months of lockdowns from a pandemic. Neuromint makes these awesome functional gums and mints that help you better your mind, find the focus that's been eluding you, and do more with your day. It's got a blend of natural caffeine, balanced with L-theanine, infused with B vitamins, and frankly, just tastes like delicious peppermint. Each piece has got a half cup of coffee worth of caffeine in there, so it's just enough to give you a boost, but not enough that you feel jittery or weird after. So I pop one of these things in before I do a phone call, before I jump on a talk, before I've got to do something important, and it just gives me a nice little boost. The L-theanine is found in green tea, so it kind of balances out the caffeine so you don't get jittery, helps reduce stress, energy focus without jitters, and the gums and mints help your brain function. Just go to getneuro.com to order your energy and focus mints and gum and better your state of mind. Just go to getneuro.com/stoic or use promo code STOIC to get 15% off all the products in their web store. That's getneuro.com/stoic or promo code STOIC to get 15% off your order. So what do you think it is? Because it struck me it's sort of maybe three possibilities or more, or some combination therein. But it's one, hey, maybe these people aren't as smart as you think they are. Two, these people are a lot more mercenary than you think you are. Like they're looking at it algorithmically and going, hey, this will be better for my audience. And then the other, it struck me, this is probably the more sympathetic view, is that, hey, these people are under a lot of stress. Their business is suffering. Their life is suffering. Maybe they've lost someone, and they're just sort of disoriented and confused and have been, I don't know, manipulated or broken in some way. And that's what's led them astray. What's your read on it?
I mean, I think that there's a combination of all of those things, and it's based on the individual and their experience. I mean, to be certain, there's a contingent of the health and wellness universe that understands that, when they post something about, the new cure to disease X or the new supplement that's going to help you lose belly fat or, increase your athletic performance, that those types of social posts are going to perform better. And
right.
We're in a world where the algorithm, favors stuff that is exclamatory in that regard. And they're going to get more traffic, and they're going to get more business, and they're going to get more attention in our attention economy. So there's a built-in incentive for people to spread that kind of information. I also think that's kind of probably most of what's going on.
Right.
Your point of, to your more cynical point, I think there's certain individuals that have that perhaps aren't as mentally balanced as they could be, and there's a glee when they get the kind of attention that they know they're going to get when they post something controversial. And then I think there's very well-intentioned people who believe that what they're saying is correct because it's being supported by their news silo. And I think, it bears repeating that, we believe that we're less manipulatable than we actually are. And, if you watch The Social Dilemma, and I'm sure you have, and you're well-versed in all the things that Tristan Harris talks about, these tools have been weaponized to such an extent. And we have an algorithm that, is favoring pushing messages that lean towards that kind of outrageous material. And this is a virus much more potent and dangerous in many ways than the coronavirus, because it's poisoning our minds. It's making us incapable of finding common ground with each other. And it's causing an utter and complete breakdown in our ability to communicate with each other. And I think about that a lot, and I'm deeply, deeply concerned about it.
I was thinking about that too. There's a great Marcus Aurelius quote, which he wrote during a plague, where he says, there's two kinds of plagues. There's a plague that can affect your character and a plague that can affect your life. And being that, the plague of his time could kill you, but what was really dangerous was what it could do to you as a person. And I feel like we almost have these sort of three viruses going on right now. We have, four. So you have the actual COVID-19 virus, which thankfully, although it's killed an ungodly amount of people, has a relatively low death rate, and seems mercifully to have spared young people most of all, the exact opposite of the 1918 pandemic. But the three I've been thinking about, I'm thinking about writing it. I'd be curious what your thoughts are. So I'd say the number one virus is conspiratorial thinking. So this is plandemic. This is Bill Gates. This is all this nonsense. This is a genetic weapon unleashed on us by the Chinese. Then there's the sort of radical thinking, or the that's not the right word, but there seems to be this like sort of indifference, right? Like you'd think if you were someone who is like, hey, this is a virus given to us by the Chinese, also you'd be taking it very seriously. But somehow those are not the same, right? It's like the anti-maskers also believe it's a biological weapon, right? It's like those are, but you have this sort of the callous indifference, right? That's like a different virus. Like, oh, I don't want this to affect my life. I have a wedding that I have, I have a gender reveal that I want to give. So obviously I shouldn't be affected. So first we have conspiratorial, then we have this sort of callous indifference. And then third, and I think I've seen this more commonly in good people that I know, is more of a sort of a magical thinking. The like, oh, this will just magically go away by the summer, or, well, it's important to me that my kids go to school, so I'm going to send them to school, and obviously we'll be exempted because it's important to me. You know what I like? And again, I'm not making a statement on whether you should or shouldn't send your kids to school, but there seems to be a sort of fantasy world that some people live in where they're like, oh, this is true and real. It just affects everybody but me and the party I'm throwing on a private island with my friends, or the event I'm hosting on the lawn of the White House.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things. I mean, first of all, there's something uniquely American about all of this.
Sure.
That perhaps we can trace back to our tradition of rugged individualism and, don't tread on me and all of that kind of stuff. This idea that, we're solely responsible for our future in this manifest destiny sort of way, and government's role is to get out of the way so I can do what I want to do.
Right.
Built into that is a lack of, kind of communitarianism or sense of social responsibility to think about how our actions are impacting our neighbors. That, I think is probably more endemic to a European culture. So that's one thing. And I think on top of that, it's important to say that people are really afraid and people really are hurting, and institutions have let us down, and people with power have lied to us and tried to manipulate us. And I think all of that, goes into our psyche. And when we're in that panic state and we're not sure how to move forward or how we're going to pay the bills or if I'm going to have a job, unless you have, a copious set of tools or some experience with personal development or, a lifetime immersed in Stoicism, chances are you're going to lash out and you're going to look for an enemy or somebody to be a receivership for your bile and your frustration. And a virus doesn't really fit the bill. We can't see it. It's invisible. So we need an individual. So who's going to be the bad guy here? And I think that creates an environment that, gets played out in the way that we're seeing it now.
I think that's maybe what struck me as the most disappointing about some of the people that you and I know, or some of the people in this space. It's like, oh, you don't actually mean any of this, right?
Right.
Or that you have talked about it, but you haven't actually internalized it. Because if you really understood what you're saying right now, you would be aghast at the horrifying implications of either the remark or the decisions that you're making. And I think, I don't know, it's like, it sort of struck me as like, what's the point of all of this reading and writing and watching these videos and working on this self-improvement stuff, if when you are subjected to something like this, it makes you worse and not better?
That's the thing, right? I mean, that's part of my whole thing with the whole self-help industry at large. And as somebody who's been, hosting a podcast for many years, I'm now on these lists with the publishing houses. So I get all the galleys in the mail, and it's just unbelievable. Like every week I'll get like a dozen self-help books, and it makes you kind of callous to all of it. You're like, this is all bullshit. It's all nonsense. Of course, that's not true. Every single one of these books, I'm sure, has wisdom in it that, if applied, is going to make your life better. But there is this gap between the information and the application of the information. And I think there's this sense that if you're reading these books, that it's making you better, and you're unconscious of the fact that you're not actually practicing any of the tools in the literature that you're consuming.
Sure.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing when you scroll through Instagram or Twitter and you see a quote that inspires you, and you get this little rush, and then you feel like you've actually done something when you actually haven't done anything.
So how have you been thinking about this in your own life? I'm just sort of curious, like, how have you felt like you've gotten better over the interim period, and where do you feel like you've maybe fallen short?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I entered into this thinking I was incredibly well equipped to navigate all of it, being, fundamentally a pretty introverted.
Sure.
Whose life,
that has been the nice part about it.
It's like my dream is just to be left alone and
Right.
not have anyone bother me. So, the quieting down of, all the travel and the emails and the obligations and the phone calls, I was like, this is going to be great. I can sit in this container studio and I can write and I can do my thing, and no one's going to bug me, and I don't have to go to dinner parties and stuff.
Right.
But what I've realized, what are we in, month 7 or 8 of this whole thing?
Who knows?
Is that even though that is my, my character, I miss human interaction. I really do. And it's made me appreciate that no matter how much you feel like you're an island, that it's important, as a human being, to have connection with other people in the 3-dimensional world. So that's been sort of a sobering revelation. Like, actually, I need people in my life. But I think I've done a pretty good job of, practicing a principle that I think is fundamental to Stoicism, but also to the 12 steps. This idea of, trying to control the controllables and letting go of the rest, like detaching from outcomes, emotionally divorcing myself from expectations around how things are going to turn out. And, I think that principle is absolutely key in keeping you grounded in an era in which, we can't make plans and we don't know what's going to happen. So I feel quite fit in that regard. Like, all of my, training over the years is working out well. But, I have been thrown curveballs as a parent. I help parent. I have 2 stepsons who are now 25 and 24. They're amazing kids, and they've moved back home at the beginning of quarantine, and they've just been a dream. And helping to parent them into adulthood was a learning experience, but it went pretty smoothly. It did not prepare me for the strange foreign genus of human being called the teenage girl.
Right. Sure.
That's been, very destabilizing, trying to sort of surf the emotional vicissitudes and the kind of hormonal pangs of, of my daughters, has been an incredible teacher, because I will get triggered and then I'll react and we'll end up in, some argument, and it's, just everything goes off the rails. And then I have to regroup and assess and try to do better the next time. And so that's why Mathis, my 16-year-old, she really is my guru right now, because she's pushing me and testing me in ways that, I've never been tested before.
You said no man is an island, or whatever. Have you actually read that poem recently?
No, I haven't.
I'm going to read it to you because I read it last night to my son. I've been reading poems to my son before bed. And I honestly, I feel like there's no better poem for this moment. It's only like one stanza, so I'll do it. It says, "No man is an island entire of himself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." Isn't that incredible?
That is. I think our culture could use a heavy dose of that right now. I feel like we're proceeding in a way that is completely contradictory to that idea right now.
I would totally agree. I mean, I think that line that hit me, it's if any clod washes away, the whole is less. I think nothing has saddened me more when I've seen people who are fans of my stuff. So let's call it self-identified Stoics expressing it, but some idea of like, most of these people would have died anyway. They were already old. They had pre-existing conditions of some kind. Any attempt to rationalize the immense tragedy of what's happened. I think of all the things that have caused me to lose my cool, it's not been not being able to travel. It's not been the money that I've lost. It's not been the opportunities that I missed out on. It's watching regular human beings say something so shitty.
I think it's fear. I think people are afraid and they're worried about how they're going to get theirs, right? And that's what's disappointing. It's like, we're all in this together. We're all suffering to some extent, some more than others. But that lashing out, comes from this idea that we live in a zero-sum game, and the pie is limited, and somebody else is going to get my slice, and I need to, do something about that. But because they're afraid, and I think the only way, it is upsetting, and I share that with you, but my practice has been to try to, go behind what is the layer behind that? Like,
sure,
what's motivating that statement? What is going on with that individual that has put them in that frame of mind? And the more I can listen more and talk less and understand that, every man is right from his point of view, I'm able to connect with a little bit of compassion. And I do that selfishly, because I just don't want to walk around angry and frustrated and resentful, because that's, denigrating the quality of my day.
Yeah, I think even your idea that that's coming from a place of fear and worried about how they're going to get theirs is itself somewhat of a compassionate act. And I get it, right? It's like, I was thinking about this. It's like, it's very easy to say, somebody shouldn't be doing X, Y, or Z. And then you get a speaking offer, or you get a really cool opportunity to go do something with someone. And now all of a sudden you're having to sacrifice something in a way that, it's very easy for you to say other people should sacrifice, but it's hard to go, I'm going to miss out. I was telling you about a gig I got offered, and I was like, look, I'll do it if there's rapid testing at the door, if everyone wears masks, these things. And they came back and they said, well, we're not going to do like the testing, but we'll pay you more money. And it was like, okay, so it's good for me. It's better for me, but I have to, it has to do the exact opposite of what you're saying. We can very naturally go through the world zero sum. And it's much harder to think, okay, I'm going to actually sacrifice. I'm not going to get something that's good for me because I think it would be bad for other people. And there's a line from James Stockdale. He says the flip side of what's in it for me has to be I am my brother's keeper. And so you have to be able to think like, hey, if I do that, what if everyone did what I'm about to do? What would the implications of that be?
Yeah, it's a perfect test case, right? For you to practice all these
Yes.
that you talk about. And are you going to be able to fulfill your promise to yourself and live that life, right? It's easy when it's academic. It's difficult when they're dangling a big paycheck in front of you.
I was thinking more about this health and wellness thing, and I think you and I have talked about it offline, but I thought it might be interesting to talk about, especially if your book is about change. I feel like the other thing that I've seen become really common in our community or among people we are mutual friends with as well, and I'm not talking about anyone specific. It's a trend that I'm talking about, but there also seems to be this idea for all the idea of sort of meditation and wisdom and learning and all of that, that almost seems to have become a bit passe with people. And now the magical way to insight is with this psychedelic or that psychedelic or this psychedelic enhanced therapy or that one. Curious what you think as a sober guy. What's your reaction to that? Because it tends to be much more, I think, in your world of the sort of Eastern stuff more than my world as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I would say first and foremost, as somebody who's been in recovery for a very long time, I'm a recovering alcoholic. When somebody tells me the, my spiritual evolution can be achieved through a mind altering substance, my immediate response is I'm all in on that. Like that's
Sure,
exactly what my alcoholism wants to feed itself, right?
sure.
So there's a huge part of me that just wants to go explore that to the hilt. But I know well enough that that is not in my best interest. At the same time, I acknowledge that there's amazing science being performed right now in the world of psychedelics. They're seeing positive impacts on people's depression and PTSD, et cetera. So there is, I'm not going to dismiss it. I'm just not sure it's correct for me. And I think it's important for myself and for anybody who's listening to understand that that journey towards self-connection, that path to self-actualization, your own personal evolution is not something that can be shortcut. And you shouldn't be looking for shortcuts. It's only through weathering obstacles and grappling with difficulties and making mistakes that we truly learn who we are and as a consequence grow. But it's tricky. Like I've got a very good friend, somebody who's also been sober a very long time, who recently went to one of these labs and did a psilocybin experiment with like the top guy, scientist in this field. And he basically said there was before and now there's after. And I can't put in words how profound it was. And you've got to do this, right? And so that rents a lot of space in my mind.
Sure.
This isn't somebody who's flying down to South America all the time to sit with shamans. Like this is a guy who's been in like 12-step for decades. So that messes me up, and I'm still, I want to approach it from a perspective of first principles with a learner's mind. So I haven't said absolutely no to it, but I'm not the guy who's going to go on ayahuasca trips. Like
Yeah.
I'm on my own journey, and I just don't think that that would be in service to me. And I also think, not to spin things too mystically, but when you're taking in a really powerful mind altering substance, you've got to be really careful. Like if you're not emotionally fit, that can really mess you up. And I've seen it mess up a lot of other people. And even though it's not, technically an addictive substance, I also have friends that are doing it all the time. Like I know one guy who does an ayahuasca trip like almost every week. He did like 50 ayahuasca trips in a year. And I'm like, you're not enlightened yet, right? So what is this doing for you? He calls
Right.
it work, right? And I'm like, well, I'm going to pursue the work in a different manner.
Yeah, I think there's also this part that I think it's a very human tendency to think that enlightenment or wisdom is a place that you arrive at. And so that you can do a shortcut or that you can get it. You know what I mean? Like the idea that there's this kind of work and there's that kind of work and this is just a, you know, more technologically advanced form of it or something. It strikes me as maybe missing the point a little bit as well. Like it's supposed to take a long time and be a lifelong process because it's not a thing that you get.
Right. The idea that it can be purchased is anathema to the very idea itself. And
Yes,
the Buddha who said something like, you know, what he was asked, you know, what happens if and when you become enlightened? Like chop wood, you know, carry water, then you become
sure.
enlightened, and what? You chop wood and you carry water. Like this
Yeah.
is, it's not, you don't arrive at the Bodhi tree. You continue to live your life.
And maybe this is your point about sort of being leery from a sober perspective. I think also my sort of cynicism kicks in where it's like whenever I see something become very trendy with a group of people who have also been on different bandwagons that didn't work out, I'm very suspicious. You know what I mean? It's like a few months ago, these were the same people telling us polyamory was the future, and then this was the future, and then this was the future. And it reminds me of this thing Seneca talks about, sort of people who flee from place to place looking for enlightenment or happiness. He says it's like the person who thinks that flipping over their pillow is going to finally make them comfortable and let them sleep. And so I'm suspicious too that like the people who are shouting that this is the next big thing a couple months ago or years ago were convinced some other thing was the next big thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in AA, it's called pulling a geographic, and the geographic can be emotional or mental, as you know, as well as physical. The idea that, you know, I'm going to find solace or the answers that I seek, or you know, peace of mind if I go to this place or I adopt this habit. And what it overlooks is that you're bringing yourself with you and
Yeah.
all of the baggage and your problems. So it's not your geographic location or this new, you know, biohack that's going to do the trick. Fundamentally, it's, you know, the heavy lifting of really facing yourself in the most objective way possible, and, you know, grappling with your character defects, taking inventory, you know, doing all the work that's required so that you can look people in the eye and, you know, live a life of integrity and purpose.
Yeah, I think Epicurus said, thus every man flees himself. And I think that, you know, you can do it mentally, figuratively, or you can do it literally, but it's all some form of the same escape.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what, you know, drug addiction is in certain respects? Like, you're running away from yourself because you're so uncomfortable with who you are, but it's also a bit of a spiritual seeking thing because you're trying to find answers, you're trying to find comfort, you're doing it in a very unhealthy way, but there is that component of like trying to get out of yourself to find a solution to what ails you.
Yeah, it's like I empathize with it and then I'm suspicious of it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It, you know, the older you get, you have more of a 10,000 foot view on all of these trends because you've weathered, you know, a lot of them, and you've seen them come and go, and you've seen the people who have stayed true to what their core philosophy is, and then you see the people that blow in the wind and align themselves with whatever the new thing is. And it goes back to what we were talking about originally, which is the difference between somebody who's really carrying, you know, a message that that is meaningful versus the person who's trying to get the clicks or, you know, trying to play the, you know, the attention game.
Yeah, it's like I think, and maybe this is a silly way to think about it, but I sort of go, when in all of history has someone come back and said, I have the medical solution to this spiritual or psychological issue, and it not blown up horribly in our faces.
Mm. Yeah, never, right? But the human mind is wired to desire that. There's something about that that's so compelling and appealing. And I think it's also important to point out that all of these things that are happening right now are happening against a backdrop in which we've lost appreciation for nuance, right? Like we're in a black and white clickbait world. Everybody has to align their views with one particular tribe, and it's not okay to have complex ideas that span the spectrum, and so the simpler solutions are the ones that people are going to gravitate towards, because not only can they understand that, but ultimately they're easier to communicate, and that's why they're getting traction.
Well, and to go to your point earlier about that sort of health and wellness space, it's like if you built your brand or your identity on going, hey, everyone's telling, like in your case, it's veganism. It's like, hey, everything the food industries are telling you about health is totally wrong, and you're right in that case. Like you have a lot of evidence that, hey, we are being deceived. The truth is being kept from us. It makes you a lot more susceptible to think that you found a magical solution or a hidden truth or uncovered a secret that is being kept. It's like when leadership in science and in politics and in culture and in spirituality have so grievously failed us, it drives people to search underground solutions to these problems. And I think that that's part of where we are right now as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just nailed it, because there have been lies propagated, and if you have a personal experience where you have somewhat of an epiphany about that, does that not make you more susceptible to the next piece of information being untruthful, right? And that's why it's complicated. It's not black or white, because there are vested interests that profit from you being confused about whether it's health and fitness or politics or what have you. But the trick is trying to remain grounded and objective enough so that you still become a reliable barometer of things that are true versus partisan versus complete outright unbased conspiracy theory.
I wanted to talk to you about the new book a little bit. One, walk me through the decision to self-publish. That's fascinating and interesting, and something I've been kicking around a little bit myself too.
This new book is called Voicing Change, and it's basically wisdom and inspiration from the podcast. This podcast that I've been doing for over 8 years now. I've interviewed 550 plus people at this point, spent thousands of hours talking to people. You've been on 4 times, I think.
No, and I was just doing the math as you were saying that. If you have 500 guests, I think each one of the episodes I've done is almost 2 or 3 hours. That really is thousands of hours that you spend in these conversations.
I mean, an unbelievable amount of time spent, in deep, reflective conversation with people that I respect, people that I want to learn from. And I wanted to be able to canonize that a little bit, basically to respect all these amazing individuals and the time that they've gifted me, but also as a thank you to the audience as well, to have kind of a keepsake. And that's why it's in kind of a coffee book form. You can put it out on a table. It looks beautiful. We have amazing photographs. Your display is wonderful, and you contributed an essay, so thank you for that. So that you can read, not everybody listens to every episode. They can discover new people or share it with their friends. And I wanted to package it in a really aesthetically pleasing way. With that, of course, it becomes an expensive book, right? It's
sure
photographs, and I just thought, this is not the kind of book that a publisher is going to be able to justify giving me the kind of advance that I would demand for something like this. Like financially, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them. Also, this is something that could turn into a series. Like I could put one of these out every single year. And I just thought cool experiment to try to do this ourselves and control it soup to nuts. So we're doing that. We created the whole thing in-house. It is, really, I'm super proud of it. It really is a beautiful book. And we're selling it exclusively through our website. And now we're starting to, figure out what the challenges with that are, because we want to ship globally. But of course, shipping is crazy expensive. And if we're not going to put it on Amazon, who takes 40% of the revenue,
Sure.
then, we're basically placing that burden on the consumer who's so acclimated to free shipping or, significantly reduced shipping costs. So now it becomes a customer service thing. Like, people are like, you gotta be kidding me. It costs $30 to ship this book. And it's like, well, it is what it is. Like, you're glad that we're not on Amazon, but this is the true, financial picture of what it means to create a product and control it yourself. So we're in the early stages of it. So far, I'm super thrilled. And the idea of, having a book out in the world where there isn't any kind of, middlemen involved is pretty cool. But you do have to take responsibility for all the little things, and you become aware of all the things that the publisher handles for you. But ultimately, there is a different sense of satisfaction with it. We start shipping on November 10th, but we've already broken even on our first printing. And the idea that, years from now, you're not going to be making $1 on your book, but you're actually going to be making, what you should be getting paid for your book that you created is a cool thing. So
it is really interesting, because I've been sort of experimenting with some of that stuff with Daily Stoic. And it's like, one, I think there's something really important and powerful about actually figuring out how the whole process works. Like you said, from soup to nuts, actually understanding oh, these are all the different phases of it. I think that's really interesting. And then, yeah, the economics are fascinating too. You're like, it's like, okay, so I've sold roughly 3 million books. Let's say that's $15 a book. Somebody made $45 million, but it wasn't me, I mean, not even close, right? And you're like, oh, I see why Penguin Random House has a building in Manhattan, but you also realize, as you said, it's like, oh, there was a lot of people taking care of stuff for me that I was not aware of. Customer service being the most significant of those obstacles.
And of course, your book is actually underwriting a lot of other books.
Yes.
Penguin Random House, because it's the rare book that breaks out in that kind of way. Most books don't earn out their advances or are not profitable. So for every, Obstacle is the Way or Daily Stoic, there's 30 books that they have to, pay for. So you're paying for those people.
When I think anytime you have a direct connection with your audience, that's really powerful too. Like the idea even that it's like, you sort of realize it's like, oh, and I wrote the book, then I sold it to a publisher, and then that publisher sold it to, in some cases, a sub-publisher, or who then sold it to a bookstore, who then sold it to a customer. You're like, whoa, there's a lot of intermediaries between me and the customer. And that's not to say, that's the problem with that, is not just that each one of those people is taking a piece of it. It's just, you realize you're very alienated from the people that you're actually making stuff for. And I think the more connected you are, and that's what's so great about podcasts, is that it's like you and I are recording this, and sure, it'll be edited by someone, but then it goes directly to the people who are hearing it, as these words are coming out of my mouth. And that's a really special thing.
Yeah, it's super cool and powerful. And for somebody like yourself who has such a vast audience and people that are, so loyal to the things that you talk about, it would be interesting for you to take a stab at a self-published book to see what that looks like. I think when you're actually asking somebody to buy something, that's the true test of just how engaged that community is. And we're learning that we have a super engaged community, and it's making me rethink well, we can just do this ourselves. Do we really need anybody else involved here? And that's not to say that this was, this book was a massive undertaking. It was a team of people.
Sure.
I'm able at this point to create some infrastructure around this, because you're really running a side business. It's almost like a whole new thing that, requires a lot of time and attention. And for somebody like yourself, you have to balance that against your sensibility, which is like, I just want to write books and move on to the next book, and I'll let all these other people handle that. And I'll happily, take that bargain. So I'm not making 45 million, but I'm making, a good amount, and I can just focus on doing the thing that I do best.
Although when you express it that way, it doesn't sound like a great bargain. You make the 45 million. I'll no, but you probably won't like hearing this as much, but I did a leather bound edition of, the Daily Stoic. So I went to my publisher and said, hey, should we do like a premium edition? And they were like you said, they were like, well, that math doesn't really make sense to us. We don't want to do an edition that's going to sell a few thousand copies a year. And I said, well, can I just buy the rights back to this edition of my own book? And they said, sure. And we did it. It's like, it was incredible to go like, I made this and I sold it directly to people who wanted it. I didn't have to sell it for half price to someone else who then marked it up 2x. It's like, that's so inefficient. And there's just something I think special about making something. That's why platforms like Etsy are powerful. That's why, co-ops are cool. Anytime you're like directly going to the audience, it's cool.
And I think we're really still in the infancy of all of this, right? Like we're, both making a living, essentially in certain respects, like by dint of the internet. We're at the starting gate of all of this. Like, what does this look like in 10 years and
sure.
50 years and 20 years? And I think we're just going to see more and more people realizing, to kind of, coin what James Altucher talks about all the time, like this choose yourself economy, where a lot of these gatekeepers and middle people were starting to realize like, hey, maybe we don't need them as much as we thought that we did. And I think psychologically that shifts your perspective to the creation process, because you're no longer seeking permission. You're just more in that creative place of purity.
But and I think this goes to the idea in the book, which is like, that requires some change. It requires one to undergo a certain change to be in a position to do that, especially if up until this point, your entire career has been getting permission, working with gatekeepers, doing it through the traditional system. Like you have to go, no, I'm going to do it a totally different way.
Yeah. And there is no right or wrong, I should say. Like, I've done it the other way also. And with our first cookbook, The Plant Power Way, like we created that in-house as well. And the idea was we were going to self-publish it. But at the last minute, after it was essentially done, I was like, I have to see.
Yeah, sure. Test the market.
Value this. And they valued it highly. And we made the decision to do it the traditional way. Also because it was it was the first time my wife's name was going to end up on a book. And I just thought it would be better to help legitimize her to go that route initially, rather than try to do it the other way around. And I'm glad we did it that way. We would have made more money if we had self-published it, but that book would not have made its way into the hands of as many people, which was much more important to me at that time.
Yeah, I like the idea too. I think it's a little bit more ancient. It's like part of what our sort of mass culture has become is like that you have to have a huge audience, that you have to reach so many, many, many people. The economy of scale it works, but it actually doesn't work that well for the individual, right? Because it's sort of a winner take all kind of a thing. The idea of like, hey, we broke even on this book selling you probably only had to sell a few hundred copies to break even on it. I think that's what's been cool about Daily Stoic and some of the products we've done is you're playing at a smaller scale. So you're able to make something much more niche, but therefore much more valuable in some ways, because it doesn't have to please everyone and it doesn't have to be palatable for a mass audience.
Yeah. I mean, that's been the really refreshing aspect of this latest book. I mean, I think when you put a book out, and you know this as well as anyone, there's a sort of perversion that occurs. Like it has to, the pre-order campaign has to, you got to sell these books in the pre-order window, because that's what dictates bookseller, orders and all of these lists that we put all this, importance on. And so much of it is bullshit. And that system is gamed so often by people who have means, that it's become meaningless. And with this book, to opt out of all of that is so refreshing. It's like,
Yes.
pre-order, order, like, I don't care. Like, and I'm not trying to sell this book to a billion people. Like, I just want to get it to the people who care about what I'm doing. And I'm super awesome with that. It doesn't have to be anything beyond that. And to kind of let go of those expectations, or that, I should say, the pressure that you place upon yourself as an author, and how, the book is going to be not only received, but perceived by, the ecosystem that cares about publishing. To just opt out of that completely has been, really nice.
Well, you brought up the social dilemma earlier. I thought it was, a couple months ago, Instagram made that decision to take away likes from posts. Although weirdly for us, like people with the blue check, they didn't do it. So we're still suffering under the tyranny of the numbers. But I think one of the things that I found about like doing the leather bound edition or doing the other products that we sold is that because like you're handling the business side of it and it's not public, a lot of the vanity comes away, because you like, it's like when I put this up on YouTube, I'm going to see how many views it does. And because I can see how many views it does, naturally you want it to be as many as possible. But if it was a private video or somehow a site that didn't track views, that thought would never occur to you. And you would only think, is this good? Have the people that I showed it to said that they appreciated it, yes or no? And in a weird way, podcasts are the same way. Although there are download numbers for podcasts, I wonder if one of the reasons the medium has thrived is that nobody really knows how anyone else is doing. And the numbers are so delayed and not public, you're not like tracking it. You're just like, was it a good episode or not?
Yeah, that's been really refreshing. I mean, there are algorithms and like, rankings and all that kind of stuff, but they can't even agree upon, what a listen is. This whole war going on in podcasting about, what constitutes a download or a stream. So there isn't even any agreement, which is kind of nice too, because it's like, I don't want to care about that. All I want to do is try to have a present, authentic experience, make it as good as I can, and then I put it on the internet. But I put mine up on YouTube too. So not only are you seeing that and you then, want it to, be a certain way, like you want it to have, you want it to get traction, everybody else can see it, right? So they're making that decision about your inherent value based upon the amount of attention that you're getting. And I think that that's, it's really damaging to culture.
Yeah, it's inherently corruptive. It's like you put a number on it and it suddenly becomes less good. Like I just imagine, because this is where I thought we'd wrap up, is I was thinking about your idea of like a sort of a book about these conversations. It's like the greatest conversationalist in history is Socrates. Imagine what Socrates' conversations would have been if you also had this other eye towards how they're performing.
Well, that would require application of the Stoic principles to divorce yourself from caring about that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But we're all human beings, and it's almost refreshing to hear you say that you struggle with how to interact with this attention economy and do it in a healthy way.
Well, I kind of have just an abstinence policy about it, where it's like most of the numbers are just kept from me in one form or another. And so I don't know. And then I think it's like whenever you make a habit of checking, it's when you get into trouble. There used to be a website called Novel Rank, and you would put in the ISBN of your book, and it would tell you not just how it's doing in the US, but all the different translations on all the different Amazons at the same time. And maybe like 5 years ago, it closed, like the guy who made the website closed. And I swear this guy gave me like cumulatively hours, days of my life back, because now that it doesn't exist, that energy goes somewhere else. I can't check it anymore.
Yeah, you're much better off, right?
Of course.
Yeah, it's difficult, man. I think that I have found myself, I wouldn't say editing myself, but more self-conscious in podcasts over maybe the last 6 months than I ever remember past. And I don't know whether that's a function of this hair trigger climate that we're in right now, this fear of like, I don't want to say the thing that's going to make people mad. And I think it tracks back to this fear around audience reaction.
Sure.
And so the work that I'm doing right now is to completely divorce myself from all comments. Like, I don't want any of that interfering with my thought process. Like, I want to be able to speak authentically. I want to be able to speak with conviction. And I can't, the minute I start thinking about like, how is this going to land with a certain individual, your history, right? Like, the whole value of what I'm trying to do becomes denigrated as a result of that process. And I think it's because of this infection of vitriol and acrimony that is making, nuanced conversation so difficult right now. Like, all you have to do is look at your comment section or what people say in response to whatever Sam Harris decides to tweet that day or anything like that. And you realize, like, it's really a sewer out there, and that stuff will mess with you psychologically if you're not really careful and create healthy boundaries around it.
No, I think you got to put up boundaries there. For me, the boundary I have to work on more, I'd be curious what you think, is it's like, if I, like, let's say I do look at the numbers for something, usually I'm just pretty pleased. I'm like, oh, wow, people care. This is great. It's when it's when those numbers are relative to someone else, that's when you get in trouble. So it's like, if you look and you're like, oh, hey, 200,000 people listen to this interview, you're like, that's amazing. I would have killed for that 5 years ago. The problem is then you see in the rankings somebody else did 200,001, and now all of a sudden it's not good enough, right? And so I think as a competitive person, one of the things you almost have to do in creative pursuits is almost put those like horse blinders on, so you don't actually know who and what you're competing with, because it doesn't take you to a good place.
No, it never does. And it never ends either. And it doesn't matter how well you do, because somebody else is out there doing better, and you will continually be measuring yourself up against that individual on this habit trail. Like, I think I've heard you talk about this. Maybe it was with James Altucher about the Forbes list, right? Like,
yeah,
these billionaires who just, couldn't possibly spend all the money that they have, get irate when one individual is above them in the top 10, richest people in the world. Like, it's utter insanity. And it's, that makes for an easy example to illustrate how preposterous the whole thing is. But then we have to reflect back on ourselves and realize that we're all doing some version of that.
Yeah, right. It doesn't matter if you're in the 1% or the 0.01% or the 10%, you're judging yourself compared to the other people. And there's that Theodore Roosevelt quote that comparison is the thief of joy, which I think is about as beautifully as it could possibly be expressed.
Yeah, and also the enemy of creative expression.
Sure.
Because it's doing it from a place of trying to measure up against someone else, other than from a purity of heart. It's not going to be good anyway.
Right. I think about it are you doing it from a place of a fullness, or a place of emptiness? And the fullness is where you want to be coming from, the sense of enough.
And in order to do that, you have to live your life, which means you got to put the phone down. And
yes, exactly. Rich, thanks so much. This was amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ryan.